everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany, and in today's video we are going to be doing the last video in our learning to read and understand commercial patterns. So this video is going to be part 4, and we are going to be sewing the skirt that we cut out in part 3, which was Simplicity 8605. I cut out view D, so we're going to be sewing that skirt in this video. If you missed the other 3 videos in this series, check out the description box. I have linked them all there. In those videos, we covered all the details and information for learning to read and understand patterns. So the first video, we covered the pattern envelope, the front and back, went over all those details. In the second video, we opened up the pattern and we covered the general directions and sewing instructions. In part 3, we cut out our tissue paper, we cut out fabric and transferred all our markings. And in this video today, we're going to be sewing the skirt. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about this Simplicity multi-size pattern. I get a lot of questions about how I fit my garments, especially because I'm in multiple sizes. So my bust, I'm usually cutting maybe the size 14, 16, in the waist, maybe the 18, and in the hips, the 20 or the 22. So I can't just cut a pattern a straight 16 or a straight 20 and expect it to fit my measurements. I have to merge between the pattern lines. So this right here is a multi-size pattern. It's an easy way to fit your pattern. This is in some Simplicity patterns on their brown tissue paper. When I came across this, it was like the light bulb went off, because this right here, this little guide, showed me how I can merge to get the patterns to fit, and this is what I've been doing ever since. So the first one right here, it's just if you have one size. So if you're just cutting a straight size 10, a straight size 14, then you're not making any adjustments between the bust, the waist, and the hips. So you just follow along your solid cutting line for the size 14. Now, if you have a one-piece garment, so maybe you're making a dress and you do need to make some adjustments between the bust, waist, and hips. So maybe this first solid line is the size 14, the middle one is the 16, the last one over here is the 18. This is showing you how you cut along the solid line for the 14 around the bust. So all of this around the neckline, the armhole, is all for around the bust. So that's your size 14. But right here around your waist, maybe you need a little bit more room, so you need to go over to the next size. You can see they just moved this line over. So right here around the waist, you have that extra room right here, and you've merged over to the next size. And if you need to merge over again for the hips, then you can just gradually bring that line over. So by the time you get to the hip, you have the extra room for the measurement that you need. So this right here is for a one-piece garment, something similar to a dress. If you're making something with a bodice and a skirt, so maybe this is a bodice and a skirt with a waistline seam, or maybe you have a bodice and pants for a jumpsuit that you're connecting and you need to make those same adjustments. This again, it shows you how along the top you can cut that solid line for around the bust. You can merge over at the waist where you need that extra measurement at, so you need the next size at the waist, just merge over there. And they've started right here for the bottom piece at the size 2, because when we sew these together, we need this to match. So you start here at the 2 for the waist, and then if you need to, you can just merge over to the next size for around the hips. Now, I must say that this here is not to take the place of doing other pattern adjustments. So if you need to do a full bust adjustment, then you need to do that full bust adjustment. Doing this will not replace the need for that. You may still need to add some length. You may still need to do a sway back adjustment. This right here is just to get you a better fit, especially if you are in between multiple sizes. But please still do the other adjustments if you need them to your pattern pieces to help you get a better fit for your garments. To begin sewing view D on Simplicity 8605, the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and grab our front and back and our pocket pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and put 4 to the side. And with right sides facing, I'm going to open out one of the skirts. I'm going to grab 2 pocket pieces, and we are going to place them along the sides, matching up our circles and our notches. Before I pin the pocket in place, I want to show you that I've already finished off the raw edges around the curve of my pocket. I do this every time before I install a pocket because I want this curve edge right here to be finished. Once I sew it onto the side seam right here, then I can go ahead and finish this raw edge off with the side seam together. But before I install it, I always go ahead and just finish off the raw edge. And you can see here I have like this little light pink. This is the thread that I had in my serger, and it goes well with the fabric, so I just kept it. I also wanted to mention, because I had a question about notches, because like I said, I always finish off my raw edges before I install it. So what do I do with my notches? I do not trim away any fabric when I am serging off the raw edge. So if I look closely, I can still see where my notches are. So right here, you can see those are 2 notches right here. Now, if this is a problem for you, you can always just grab a marking tool and you can just place a mark right where your notches are. And that way you can still match up your fabric and match up your notches. If you feel like when you are serging, you may accidentally trim off more fabric and trim off your notches, just place a mark where they are. That way you'll still be able to match them up on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead now and pin right sides facing 1 pocket. I'm going to match up my notch and pin in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin the other pocket and skirt the same exact way, and then we can stitch this at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to go ahead and stitch my pocket at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Now that I have stitched on the pocket, I'm going to stitch on the other 3 pockets the same way, and now I'm going to finish off the raw edge with my serger. Now that we have attached our pockets to the side seams of the front and the back, you can see here I've gone ahead and finished off the raw edge. Next, we want to go ahead and press our pocket, so I'm going to press it going out toward the seam. Now when you press, if you are using like some marking tool that disappears with heat, like I am, you will have to bring your pattern pieces back out to transfer these circles that we have right here, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and press our pockets going out. Now that we have pressed out our pockets, the next step is to go ahead and do understitching on the front pockets only. So I'm just going to start using this one right here as the front and this one as the back. These pieces are exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one you choose. So this one right here, again, I'm going to use this one as the front, and we're going to do understitching right here along the front 2 pockets. We're not going to do it on the back, only on the front. So for understitching, you want to make sure you have your seam allowance facing toward your pocket, and we've just pressed it toward the pocket. And we're just going to do a stitch right here along this seam, making sure that we catch the seam allowance in the stitch. So let's go ahead and do some understitching right now. Okay, so I have done the understitching on my front 2 pockets only, not on the back. So the next step, I've gone ahead and started to transfer my circles back because, like I mentioned, my pen is heat erasable. So I just need to lay my pattern piece back down and just go ahead and transfer my markings. And I didn't trim any of my fabric away. I just stitched my pocket together and just finished off the raw edge of the side seam. So I'm just going to lay my pattern piece back down, match up my notch right here, and just transfer my circles back. Now we can go ahead and place our front and back right sides facing, matching up our seams, our pockets, our circles, and we can go ahead and pin everything in place. I'm going to place a pin in this large circle here. Place a pin here. Pin around the pockets. And pin down the remaining seam here. Alright, now that we have it pinned, we can go to the sewing machine and we can go ahead and stitch our side seam in place. So I'm going to begin stitching up here at the top. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and I'm going to come to this large stitch and I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to leave this right here open for the pocket. I'm going to begin stitching right here at this circle, back stitching and stitching all the way down to the hem, back stitch when I get there, and then I'm going to stitch all the way around the pocket. So let's go ahead and do our stitches now. Now that we have our side seams sewn together, so I've stitched both of mine here, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and clip the back seam allowance only right below the pocket. So I took another look at my pockets to see which one I went ahead and did the understitching on, so I know that was the front and this is the back. So I've just put a little B here as a reminder that this is the back. I'm going to take my shears and right below the pocket, I'm just going to place a clip. And what that does, it allows the seam allowance to open up so we can press this open, and we can also press our pocket toward the front and baste that along the upper edge. First, I'm going to go ahead and snip this back seam allowance, again, right below the pocket. I'm going to grab my iron and press the seam open. Now that the seam is pressed open, I'm going to go ahead and press my pocket going toward the front. Now I'm going to grab some pins and I'm just going to pin the pocket in place right here along the upper edge through all layers, so I'm catching in the front of the skirt also. I'm just placing pins here. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, give it a press with the pocket going toward the front. I'm going to pin it across, and then I'm going to baste this in place along the upper edge to keep the pocket facing toward the front. I've set my machine to a basting stitch. My basting stitch goes up to a 5.0. It varies for machines, but it is just the longest length stitch that your machine can do, and it's just a temporary stitch to hold everything in place. Now that we have our pockets basted in place going toward the front, we can go ahead and put our skirt to the side and start to work on the casing. For the casing, you should have cut 2 of fabric. So the first step, we want to go ahead and pin down the side seam. So one of the side seams has no circles on it, no dots, just a notch. So we're just going to pin straight down that one. The side over here with the notches, I'm going to place a pin at each circle. I'm going to pin the remaining side. So for this side of the casing, we're just going to stitch it straight down and back stitch at the beginning and the end. For this side over here with the 2 dots, we're going to begin stitching and back stitch. Stitch down to 1 dot and back stitch. We're going to leave that opening between the large circles, and then we're going to begin stitching at the last circle, back stitch there, and go all the way to the end of the casing. So let's go ahead and stitch our casing sides together now. Now that we have stitched our casing together, we're going to go ahead and press the seams open. Now that we've pressed it open, we're going to fold it in half so that the wrong sides are facing, and we're going to give it a press. Now that we have pressed our casing, wrong sides facing, so the right side of your casing should be facing out. If you like, you can go to the machine and do a basting stitch to keep the raw edges together. But for me, my press is doing pretty good, so I'm not going to do the basting stitch. I'm going to go ahead and grab my skirt now, and I'm going to flip it so the right sides are out. And now I'm going to go ahead and put my casing on, but you want to make sure that this opening right here that we left is facing out toward you. So you want to be able to see the opening. See, I can see mine here when you pin it onto the skirt with the right sides facing. So now you want to match up your side seams, match up your notches, and pin your skirt in place. So there is a side seam there. You should have transferred some notches on the casing, matched them up to the notches that are on the skirt, pin those in place, and just continue pinning your casing onto the skirt with the raw edges even. Now that we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you want to stitch again a 1/4 of an inch away from that inside the seam allowance. So let's go ahead and do our stitches now. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and do another stitch a 1/4 of an inch away from that. I always like to just do my serged edge and use that as my second stitch. So that is what I'm going to do to finish off this, and then to give it a nice clean finish for this inside of this seam. Now that we have sewn on our casing, you want to make sure that you press your seam down facing toward the skirt. Now we can go back to the sewing machine and create our casings for the elastic. So to create the casings, the first stitch, we're going to come down 3/4 away from this upper edge and stitch all the way around. Again, we're coming down 3/4. The second one, we're going to come down 1.5 inches and stitch all the way around on 1.5 inches seam allowance. So first, let's go ahead and do the 3/4 stitch all the way around, so coming down from the upper edge, and then the second one come down from the upper edge 1.5 inches. Now if you don't have the little markings on your needle plate for the seam allowance, you can go ahead and just mark those in with the marking tool. My machine has the needle plate, so I'm just going to line the upper edge up with 3/4, then I'm going to line it up with 1.5 inches and just go ahead and stitch all the way around to create the casings for the elastic. So lining the upper edge of the casing up with 3/4, I'm just going to go ahead and begin stitching all the way around the casing. Now I'm going to move over so that the casing edge is lined up with 1.5 inches, and I'm just going to do the same exact thing, stitching all the way around to create another casing. So I've gone ahead and I've created my casing rows. So you can see here's the first stitch right here for the casing, and here's the second one. And over here where the opening, you should have a little opening right here to insert the elastic. We have 3 sections, but we're only going to be putting elastic in the middle and the bottom one here. So let's grab our elastic guide here, which is pattern piece number 5. And I have my elastic right here. I'm just going to measure across the elastic to the size that I cut, and I cut the medium for this skirt, so I'm just going to measure across, and I'm not pulling the elastic, I'm just laying it down here. And so once I get to the medium, I'm just going to trim that off. So here is 1, and I need 1 more. So I'm going to match that up and do 1 more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side. And now I'm going to grab a safety pin. So I have 2 safety pins here. I'm going to go ahead and pin one end to both of the elastics. So there's one, and here's one here. Okay, so I'm going to find my opening, and I am going to pull both elastics through at the same time. So I have one in the bottom opening here, and I have one in the middle one, and I'm just going to start pulling them through at the same time. If you do one at a time, it's going to be kind of hard to go back and do the second one. So this may take a little bit of time, but it's best to bring both of the elastics through the casing at the same time. So let's just go ahead and pull the elastics through. Now that we have pulled the elastic through, you want to go ahead and pin your ends together. So I have my ends pinned here, and this is the time that you want to go ahead and try on your skirt to make sure that everything fits and nothing's too tight, and you can adjust your elastic if need be. Once you're happy with everything, then you want to go ahead and pull it through. Make sure that your elastic did not twist while you were bringing it through the casing. And now we can remove our safety pins. We can go to the machine and we can lap the elastic ends over each other and then secure them in place. So let's go ahead, and again, we're going to lap the elastic. We're not just stitching it together like this. We're lapping it so the elastic will be flat in the casing. So now let's just go ahead and secure the elastic. Now that we have secured our elastic, now we want to go back and slip stitch the opening right here closed. So now you want to grab a needle and thread, and you just want to slip stitch your opening closed here. So I'm just gonna go back and forth and just create a slip stitch to close that opening. Now that we have slip stitched our opening closed, the next thing for us to do is the hem of the skirt. So you can go ahead and try on your skirt and mark up your hem where you want your hem to be. I'm just gonna go with the 2 1/4 for the hem allowance. So I'm gonna press under 1/4 inch of this raw edge, and then I'm going to press on 2 inches, and then I'm gonna stitch close to this inner fold. So again, I'm going to press under 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to fold under 2 inches and then stitch close to this inner fold. So first I'm going to go ahead and press this in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and press up to 2 inches. I'm going to grab my seam gauge here just so I know I'm at 2 inches. Or I may even just do 1 inch. I'll do 1.5 inches. And I'm just going to press this in place. And we will need to ease in a little bit of this fullness here along the hem. Now that you have your hem pressed in place, if you need to add pins, you can add some pins in it to hold it in place. I'm going to head to the sewing machine now, and I'm just going to stitch close to the inner fold. Once you have stitched your hem in place, you want to give it one final press, and then you are all done with your skirt. Well, that is all for this video, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. This is the last video in our learning to read and understand commercial patterns. So I really do hope that you all have enjoyed this little mini series. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like and subscribe, turn on those notifications so you do not miss the next video. Until then, blessings everyone. Bye.